Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. The Knock at Midnight. The Caraway Estate had stood at the edge of town for more than a century, its gray stone walls looming over the waters of Hollow Lake. By day, it was picturesque, a monument to old money and old power. But at night, when the mist rolled in from the water and the moon sank low behind the skeletal trees, it looked more like a mausoleum. The kind of place where secrets were buried beneath the soil and pressed into the very bones of the walls. Eleanor Caraway, the last living heir of the Caraway fortune, had grown used to the whispers that clung to her name. Widow, recluse, matriarch of shadows. People had called her all of those things. She didn't mind. In fact, she preferred the isolation. The world beyond her iron gates had become cruel and intrusive. Inside the estate, she was safe, untouchable, a woman with ghosts for company. On the night it began, the rain fell like pins against the glass. The grandfather clock in the parlor had just struck midnight, its groaning chime echoing through the cavernous halls. Eleanor, wrapped in a faded velvet shawl, sat in her wingback chair near the fireplace. The flames burned low, sputtering in protest against the damp that seeped through the old chimney. She sipped her tea with trembling hands, staring at the portrait that hung above the mantel, her late husband, Charles Caraway. His painted eyes seemed to follow her, just as they always had when he was alive. And then came the knock. It wasn't the tentative rapping of a visitor, nor the hurried pounding of someone in distress. It was deliberate, heavy. 3 sharp blows that reverberated through the house, rattling the crystal in the dining room cabinet and sending a shiver down Eleanor's spine. At first, she thought she'd imagined it. No one visited at this hour. No one dared come to Caraway Estate without invitation. But then the sound came again, 3 measured knocks against the great oak door at the front of the house. Her breath hitched. For a moment, she considered pretending she hadn't heard. But curiosity gnawed at her. Setting her teacup aside, she rose, each step creaking across the hardwood floor like the groan of the house itself. She lit a candle from the hearth and carried it with her down the long hallway. The flames painted the wallpaper in jittery shadows, illuminating faces of long-dead ancestors captured in oil and gilt. When she reached the door, she hesitated. Her hand hovered over the brass handle, cold sweat gathering on her palms. She hadn't seen a visitor in months. Not since her last housemaid left without notice. "Who's there?" she called, her voice thin against the howl of the storm. No answer. She swallowed hard, her heart thudding in her chest. She almost turned away. Almost. But then the knock came once more, 3 hard thuds that seemed to rattle her ribcage as much as the door. With a trembling hand, Eleanor pulled the latch. The door groaned open, the storm air rushing in, chilling her to the bone. But no one stood there. Only darkness. Rain lashed the steps, the gravel drive stretched out into the mist, and the iron gates at the far end of the property swayed and moaned against the wind. Confusion swept over her. She leaned out, candlelight flickering wildly, trying to pierce the fog. Nothing. Only silence, save for the storm. And then she saw it. At the foot of the door, resting neatly on the threshold as if placed with purpose, was a leather-bound ledger. The cover was worn, the corners frayed, and a rusted clasp held it shut. No markings, no note, no sign of who had left it there. Eleanor bent down, her joints aching, and picked it up. The leather was slick with rain but strangely warm to the touch, as if it had been carried close to someone's body only moments before. She looked left, then right, scanning the grounds. Still, no figure emerged from the mist. Whoever had knocked was gone. Closing the door, she bolted it tight, pressing her weight against it as if to bar entry to the storm, and whatever had delivered the book. Back in the parlor, she set the ledger on the table beside the fire. The candlelight danced across its cover, and Eleanor felt a strange dread settle over her chest. It was only a book, she told herself. Perhaps a prank. A cruel joke by the town's youth. They often whispered about the Caraway curse, about how the family had blood on their hands. Perhaps this was their way of mocking her. But as she sat down and unclasped the ledger, a part of her already knew it was something else. Something worse. The pages inside were yellowed, brittle at the edges, but the ink was dark and sharp, as though written only yesterday. The first page bore a list. Names, dates, and numbers, each written in precise, deliberate handwriting. Eleanor squinted, the candlelight wavering as she read the first few entries aloud to herself. Thomas Grady, March 3, 1921. 500. Isabel Clark, October 17, 1923. 250. Walter Kearns, June 2, 1926. 300. Her breath caught in her throat. These weren't random names. She knew them. Every one of them. Thomas Grady had been a gardener at the estate, dismissed after rumors of theft. He vanished shortly after. Isabel Clark had been a seamstress, rumored to have drowned in Hollow Lake. Walter Kearns, a business partner of her husband's, disappeared after a bitter dispute over property. And the numbers? Money, perhaps? Or something else? The further she turned the pages, the more names she recognized. Dozens of them. Servants, neighbors, business rivals, all people who had vanished or died mysteriously during her family's reign over Hollow Lake. Her stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. This ledger wasn't just a record. It was a confession. The candle guttered, and for a moment, the room plunged into shadow. Eleanor's hands shook as she closed the book, shoving it away as though it might bite her. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked. Her head snapped up. The sound wasn't the groan of the old timbers settling. It was deliberate, measured, like footsteps. She clutched the arms of her chair, straining her ears. Silence. Then another creak, closer this time. Her heart pounded. She wasn't alone. Gathering what strength she had, she rose and crossed the room, candle in hand. She peered into the hall, the darkness yawning wide before her. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling. "Who's there?" No answer. The fire hissed behind her, a log collapsing into ash. The house seemed to breathe around her, its walls groaning in sympathy with her fear. Eleanor stepped into the hallway, her slippers scuffing against the rug. Her candlelight reached only a few feet ahead, the rest swallowed by shadow. She moved toward the sound, each step a battle against the instinct to flee. She reached the grand staircase. The creak had come from above. Slowly, she tilted her candle upward. The landing was empty, only the portraits of her ancestors staring down with cold, painted eyes. And yet, as she turned to retreat, she heard it again, this time directly behind her. A knock. 3 sharp raps. Not on the door. On the parlor table, where she had left the ledger. Eleanor spun, the candle nearly slipping from her hand. Her breath came fast and shallow. The ledger lay where she had placed it, but its clasp was closed again, as though she had never opened it. Her scream died in her throat. She backed away, her candle sputtering. And as the wind howled outside and the rain lashed the windows, Eleanor Caraway realized something terrible. The ledger hadn't just been left at her door. It had been delivered to her. And now, it wasn't going to leave. The names inside. The ledger was heavier than it looked. Bound in dark calfskin, its edges worn with age, it carried the smell of dust, mildew, and something else. Something sharp, metallic, almost like dried blood. Eleanor Caraway stared at it from her place at the long oak table, the fire crackling weakly behind her. The knock at midnight still echoed in her mind, though the visitor who had left it had long since vanished into the night. She hadn't opened it yet. The thought of doing so filled her with a mixture of dread and obligation. Eleanor was not a woman easily unsettled. As the widow of Charles Caraway, a man whose name was synonymous with old money and quiet influence, she had weathered more than her share of hushed scandals and whispered betrayals. But this book, delivered by unseen hands in the dead of night, promised to be different. The air in the Caraway estate was heavy with stillness. From the far end of the hall came the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Upstairs, the servants had retired, their footsteps silenced hours ago. Eleanor was alone with the ledger, and it seemed to demand her attention like a predator watching its prey. Finally, with hands that trembled only slightly, she undid the brass clasp and opened the cover. The first pages. The first thing that struck her was the handwriting. It wasn't the neat cursive of a clerk or the scratchy scrawl of a hurried secretary. It was deliberate, elegant, but oddly cold. Each letter had been written with such precision that it almost looked etched, as though the ink had been burned into the page rather than laid upon it. The first page was simple. The ledger of the departed. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She turned to the next page. Dozens of them, arranged in neat columns. Beside each name was a date. Some had small symbols, an asterisk, a cross, a circle. The earliest entries were from the 1800s. The most recent were disturbingly current. Her eyes landed on one in particular. Charles Ilchoy, 11/14. Her husband. The date matched the day he had died, barely 6 months earlier. His sudden passing had shocked the community, though few had dared to question the official explanation. A heart attack in his sleep. Eleanor had worn black, stood by his grave, and accepted the condolences of neighbors and strangers alike. And yet, seeing his name in this book, written before her eyes in that icy hand, sent a chill through her bones. Had this been written after his death, or before? The ink looked aged, as though it had been set on the page long before the night he collapsed. A pattern emerges. Eleanor flipped through more pages, scanning name after name. Some she recognized. Prominent men in town, local judges, businessmen, even a few clergy. Others meant nothing to her. But with each page her unease grew. One entry caught her attention. Margaret H. Weller, March 2nd. Margaret had been one of her closest friends. She remembered the morning she'd received word of Margaret's tragic fall down the stairs in her home. That had been 3 years ago. Again, the date matched perfectly. Her hands began to sweat as she continued reading. Every name had died. Every date matched. This was no idle list. The symbols, though, puzzled her. A cross next to Charles's name. A circle beside Margaret's. Others bore different marks. They must mean something. Something the writer of this ledger had understood but had not cared to explain. As she turned another page, she noticed that not all of the entries had dates beside them. A handful were blank, waiting. Among them, one name froze her blood. Eleanor Zickerway. Her own name. Written in the same steady, merciless hand. The date was missing, but the space beside it was open, waiting to be filled. The room seemed to shrink around her. The fire hissed, a log shifting in the hearth, but Eleanor could barely hear it. She stared at the ledger, her breath shallow, her chest tight. She was not merely a widow reading a macabre artifact. She was reading her own obituary, waiting to be completed. The memory of Charles. Her mind flashed back to Charles's final days. He had been restless, pacing the halls, muttering under his breath. Eleanor had dismissed it as the stress of managing the family fortune, the endless parade of deals and partnerships that had defined his life. But now, looking at his name etched in this cursed book, she wondered if he had known. One night, shortly before his death, he had said something that seemed meaningless at the time. They had been sitting in the library, Charles nursing a glass of brandy. He had stared at the fire and whispered, "The book keeps its promises." She had asked him what he meant, but he had waved her off. Now, the words came back with terrifying clarity. Did Charles know of this ledger? Had he seen his name before it was written? Or worse, had he added it himself? The handwriting. Eleanor leaned closer, studying the handwriting. A strange thought came to her. It looked familiar. She had seen it before, in letters, contracts, or perhaps notes left around the house. But she couldn't place it. The thought gnawed at her, the recognition dancing at the edge of memory. If she could identify the writer, perhaps she could understand the purpose of this ledger. The names inside the town. The next morning, Eleanor carried the book to the library. She had spent the night restless, too frightened to sleep, listening to every creak of the house. As the gray light of dawn seeped through the curtains, she spread the ledger on the desk and began copying down the names. Her plan was simple: cross-reference them with old newspaper clippings, obituaries, and town records. If this ledger truly predicted deaths, there would be a trail. Hours passed. By noon, she had already matched 15 names with tragic ends: drownings, fires, sudden illnesses, disappearances. The pattern was undeniable. Whoever had written this book had known the dates long before they came to pass. But something else unsettled her. Many of the deaths, while outwardly accidents or natural causes, bore whispers of suspicion. A man who slipped from a train platform despite being sober and steady. A woman who fell from a window in a house with no evidence of struggle. A boy who drowned in a river he had swum in since childhood. These were not random. They were staged, concealed beneath the veil of chance. And if that were true, then the ledger was not merely a record of fate. It was a blueprint of murder. The servant's revelation. That evening, Eleanor summoned Martha, the head housemaid who had been with the family for decades. Martha was loyal, discreet, and, most importantly, she had seen more of the Caraway household than Eleanor ever could. "Martha," Eleanor said carefully, showing her the ledger. "Have you ever seen handwriting like this before?" Martha squinted at the page, her wrinkled brow furrowing. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her eyes widened and she drew back slightly. "Madam, that's Mr. Charles's hand." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "Are you certain?" "I've seen it often enough, in notes he left for me. Shopping lists, instructions. It's his." Eleanor gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles whitening. If Charles had written this, then he had kept it hidden all these years. He had not merely known of the ledger, he had been its keeper. But why would he write her name? Why would he write his own? Unless the ledger was not only a prophecy, but a contract. The implication. The thought was unbearable, yet inescapable. What if Charles had not simply chronicled deaths, but arranged them? What if each name was a victim, chosen, their deaths orchestrated to match the date he had already inscribed? That would make Charles not a victim of the ledger, but its executioner. Her husband, a murderer. And now, with Charles gone, the ledger had found its way to her. A warning? A threat? Or an invitation to continue his work? The open space beside her name mocked her. As night fell, Eleanor poured herself a glass of brandy. She sat by the fire with the ledger open, staring at the blank space next to her name. Her reflection in the window looked older, wearier. For the first time in years, she felt hunted. Every creak in the house seemed sharper, every shadow deeper. Was the one who delivered the ledger watching her now? Were they waiting for her to fulfill its prophecy, to die as Charles had written? Or was she expected to take up the pen, to fill in the blanks for others? The ledger seemed to whisper with every turn of the page. Names, dates, lives measured and ended, all neatly recorded. The book demanded to be completed, and Eleanor knew that if she didn't act soon, someone else would. The unwritten name. The night after discovering her own name inscribed in the ledger was the longest of Eleanor Caraway's life. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind trapped in an endless loop of questions. Why was her name written? Why was there no date beside it? And who had placed the book in her home, ensuring she would find it at the stroke of midnight? By dawn, she knew one thing for certain. If she waited passively for the answer, she would not live to see it. The ledger's weight. She brought the book back to the oak table in the library, the same table where Charles had signed contracts, wills, and the kind of quiet, devastating deals that built the Caraway fortune. The ledger sat at the center like a relic, its presence turning the polished wood into something sacred and cursed at once. She turned again to her own entry. Eleanor Huey, the handwriting sharp, exact, merciless. But beside it, unlike all the others, the date was absent. It looked unfinished, incomplete, as though her death had not yet been sealed. But why leave it blank? If Charles, or whoever held the pen, could so easily predict, or cause, deaths, why not hers? The blank space was not comfort. It was a threat. It meant someone was waiting. A letter hidden. Eleanor remembered something. Weeks before Charles's death, she had found him in the study, bent over his desk, furiously writing in that same steady hand. When she entered, he had slammed the book shut. She now realized it must have been this ledger, and covered it with loose papers. On that night, he had dropped a folded letter. Eleanor had tucked it into a drawer, too weary to confront him about another secret. Heart pounding, she hurried upstairs to her writing desk. She pulled the drawer open, scattering stationery, old bills, and forgotten trinkets. At the back, yellowed and folded, was the letter. She opened it carefully. It was addressed to her. "If you are reading this, Eleanor, then I have failed." Her eyes raced across the words. Charles confessed that the ledger had been in his family for generations. Each Caraway heir had inherited it, sworn to keep it hidden and complete. The names written inside were not predictions, but obligations. Once a name appeared, the heir was bound to ensure that death came to pass. Those who refused, he wrote, brought ruin not only upon themselves but upon the family. He claimed his grandfather had resisted once, and within months, the Caraway holdings collapsed, their reputation nearly destroyed, until another death restored the balance. Charles admitted he had followed the ledger's demands faithfully. But as he aged, the burden had grown unbearable. He had begun to believe the book itself was cursed, that it ensnared whoever held it, binding their will. And then, in a final line, the words that froze her. "Your name is written. I cannot bring myself to complete it, but the book will not forgive me. Be careful. Whoever carries the ledger after me will not hesitate." The ink trailed off there, as though he had been interrupted. Eleanor sat back, the paper trembling in her hands. Charles had seen her name. He had refused to kill her. And perhaps that refusal had killed him. Who wrote the names? But another mystery gnawed at her. If Charles had inherited the ledger, who wrote the names in the first place? Did Charles himself inscribe them under some compulsion? Or did they appear by some unseen hand, demanding fulfillment? She looked closely at the pages again. The ink was the same, the style the same, always precise, deliberate. But was it Charles's? Or had he only been the executor of what appeared? Her thoughts spiraled. If her name was in the ledger but unfinished, perhaps someone else had now inherited the duty to complete it, which meant someone out there knew she was marked for death. And they would come for her. A visit from the lawyer. Late that morning, the estate's lawyer, Mr. Thaddeus Crane, arrived unannounced. A tall, gaunt man with hollow cheeks and eyes that always seemed a little too calculating, Crane had handled the Caraway legal affairs for decades. "Mrs. Caraway," he said with a stiff bow, his voice like dry paper, "I hope you are well. I've come regarding some unfinished business of your late husband." Eleanor stiffened. "Unfinished business?" "Yes. Records, papers he entrusted me with. But more than that, there are questions about certain assets." His gaze flicked briefly toward the library, where the ledger sat hidden under a cloth. Eleanor forced her voice steady. Everything was accounted for in the will. Perhaps. Crane's lips curved in a humorless smile. But Charles had peculiar habits. Lists, ledgers, things he kept outside the will. "It would be best, for your protection, if I reviewed them." Her heart pounded. Did he know? "Thank you, Mr. Crane," she said firmly. "But there is nothing further for you here." Crane studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he inclined his head. "Very well. Should anything resurface, I trust you'll summon me immediately." When he left, Eleanor closed the door with shaking hands. The lawyer knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to suspect. The unwritten name. That night, Eleanor sat again before the fire, the ledger open. She flipped past the names she recognized, past the deaths she remembered. Her finger traced down to her own entry, hovering over the blank space beside it. The ledger was a trap. If she sat idly, someone else would complete it. If she acted rashly, she might only seal her fate faster. Her mind returned to the letter. Charles had defied the ledger by sparing her. He had broken its cycle and paid with his life. But what if she did not just resist? What if she rewrote it? The thought was wild, reckless, but it gripped her. What if she could seize the pen and inscribe a name of her own choosing? Not herself, but another. Would the ledger obey her? Or would it punish her as it punished Charles? The fire hissed in the hearth. The shadows seemed to lean closer, listening. Eleanor pulled a pen from the desk drawer. She dipped it in ink. Her hand hovered over the blank space beside her name. The temptation was unbearable. To write another name, to force the ledger's curse upon someone else, to take control. but fear stayed her hand. If she chose wrong, she might unleash something even darker. At last, she shut the book with a snap, her breath ragged. Not yet, but soon. The visitor. Near midnight, as the clock chimed 12, another knock echoed through the house. Her blood ran cold. She crept to the door, candle in hand. The knock came again, slow, deliberate. She opened the door. No one was there. But on the doorstep lay a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. Eleanor bent to pick it up, her heart hammering. She opened it with trembling fingers. It was a list. Her name was at the top. Below it were others, neighbors, acquaintances, even one of her servants. All written in the same precise hand as the ledger. At the bottom, scrawled in fresh ink, were 4 chilling words. Finish what he began. Eleanor dropped the paper as though it burned her. Someone knew. Someone had inherited the ledger's curse, just as Charles had feared. And they expected her to obey. But the blank beside her name told her one thing. She was not dead yet. Which meant she still had a choice. The ledger might demand blood, but Eleanor Caraway was no one's pawn. If her name was to be completed, it would not be by the hand of another. It would be by her own, or not at all. And in that decision lay the beginning of a war. The heir of the ledger. The morning after the discovery of the ledger's chilling contents, Detective Marcus Hale found himself staring at the sunlight filtering through his blinds with an unease that gnawed at him. The words inside the leather-bound book wouldn't leave his mind. Names, dates, and a strange pattern of death, all recorded in meticulous handwriting. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see the careful loops of the ink, hear the scratching of a pen from a hand long gone but still reaching into the present. Marcus wasn't one for superstitions. He believed in evidence, in facts that could be pinned to a wall or logged into a report. But the ledger felt different. It wasn't just a record of death, it was a declaration. Whoever had written it hadn't just been documenting crimes, they had been orchestrating them. And someone still cared enough to keep it hidden in a crumbling old estate. He poured himself a bitter cup of coffee, black and unflinching, before driving back to the station. Waiting for him was Erin Cole, his partner, already bent over a stack of printouts. She looked up when he entered, her eyes bright with the kind of sharp energy she only had when she was chasing something that mattered. "You're late," she teased, though her voice lacked humor. "Didn't sleep much," Marcus admitted, tossing his jacket over the back of a chair. "That book, it's not right." "I know," Erin said. She pushed a folder across the desk. "I stayed up going through the names from the ledger. Some of them matched old missing persons cases. But here's the thing, many of them were never declared homicides. They were just gone. No bodies, no closure. It's like the ledger is the only proof they ever existed." Marcus flipped through the folder. Grainy black and white photographs of young men and women, some smiling, some solemn, stared back at him. The dates beneath them matched the ledger's entries with unnerving precision. "Someone wanted to be remembered," Marcus muttered. "Someone wanted their work to be catalogued." Erin leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "The question is, who? And why keep such a thing hidden for decades?" Marcus's phone buzzed before he could answer. The call came from the county archives, where he had sent an inquiry about the property where the ledger was found. He put it on speaker. "Detective Hale?" a reedy male voice asked. "Speaking. This is Alan Porter, records custodian. You asked about ownership of the Ashford estate." "That's right. Well, according to our records, the estate was built in 1894 by the Ashford family. It's been in their name for generations, though it fell into disrepair after the last heir disappeared about 25 years ago. No one ever sold it. It just sat there." "Last heir?" Erin interjected, leaning closer. "Yes, a man named Gregory Ashford. Mid-30s when he vanished. No death certificate, no formal investigation. Just gone." Marcus exchanged a glance with Erin. "Do you have anything else on him? Employment? Family?" "Not much. But there is one thing. You should know the Ashfords were considered eccentric. Wealthy but private. Gregory was rumored to be obsessed with genealogy. He kept extensive family records. Some said he believed the Ashfords had a duty, some kind of legacy." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. Legacy like the ledger? The archivist hesitated before replying. Detective, whatever that book is, if it came from the Ashfords, I'd be careful. They had secrets, and they guarded them fiercely. Marcus ended the call, the silence in the room suddenly heavy. Aaron broke it first. So this Gregory Ashford could be the one who wrote the ledger? Or at least inherited it, Marcus said. If the family had been keeping records like that for generations, maybe he was just the last to hold the pen. Aaron frowned. That would make it more than one killer. It would make it a tradition. The word lingered between them, poisonous and absurd yet terrifyingly plausible. That afternoon, Marcus and Aaron drove to the Ashford estate, determined to search deeper. The house loomed like a corpse against the autumn sky, its windows hollow sockets staring out at the overgrown grounds. The ledger had been found in a study on the second floor, but the house was sprawling, with locked doors and entire wings left unexplored. Inside, dust lay thick on the furniture, and cobwebs sagged from the corners of the ceiling. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a protest against their presence. Marcus carried a flashlight, its narrow beam cutting through the dimness, while Aaron took photographs for evidence. They started in the library, where rows of ancient books sagged on their shelves. It smelled of mold and old paper, but Aaron noticed something immediately, a ladder leading to a section high above, where the dust wasn't as thick. "Someone's been here," she whispered. Marcus climbed the ladder carefully. At the top, he found a gap in the books. Sliding his hand inside, he pulled out a wooden box, its surface carved with intricate designs of vines and birds. The lock had long since rusted. He pried it open with a penknife. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Each one depicted a different person, men, women, even children. Some looked posed, others candid. But what unsettled Marcus most was that every face had been carefully crossed out with a black ink pen. "Jesus," Aaron muttered, covering her mouth. "These are the names in the ledger. These are their faces." Marcus nodded grimly. "This isn't just record-keeping. This is ritual." Beneath the photographs was a letter, folded and brittle with age. Marcus unfolded it gently. The handwriting was the same as the ledger's. "To the heir who carries this burden, our blood is not like others. We are chosen to witness, to record, to preserve the order of names. Each life taken is a verse in the hymn of our family, and the ledger is our scripture. Do not falter. Do not forget. The ledger is your duty, your inheritance, your proof of belonging. Fail, and the names will consume you." Aaron's voice trembled. This was never just one man. It was passed down. Like an heirloom. Marcus closed the box, his jaw tight. The Ashfords weren't eccentric. They were cultivating a family of killers. Back at the station, Marcus and Aaron dug deeper into Gregory Ashford. Records showed he had been last seen in 1997, shortly after the disappearance of a local woman named Emily Rhodes. She was 21, last spotted walking home from a diner. Her case had gone cold, but the date matched one in the ledger. When they pulled the case file, they found something else, witness testimony that a man had been seen near the diner that night, driving a car registered to Gregory Ashford. But the testimony had been dismissed at the time, citing lack of evidence. Marcus slammed the file shut. He wasn't just keeping the ledger. He was using it. "And then he disappeared," Aaron said. "Do you think someone else in the family took him out? Or carried on without him?" Marcus didn't answer, because the truth was dawning on him like a slow, relentless sunrise. Gregory might have vanished, but the ledger hadn't stopped. The last date in the book was 2001, years after Gregory was gone. That meant someone else had inherited the duty. Someone still alive. That night, Marcus sat in his apartment with the ledger spread open before him. He traced the ink with his finger, trying to imagine the man, or men, or women who had written it. Were they proud? Reluctant? Did they believe in this twisted family scripture, or were they trapped by it? One name near the end caught his eye. Daniel Ashford, 1999. The difference was striking. Every other entry had been a victim. But this was an Ashford. Marcus flipped back through the book. No other family members were listed. Only Daniel. He picked up his phone and called Aaron. We need to find out who Daniel Ashford was. Why he's in here. Why the family killed one of their own. The next day, their research revealed Daniel was Gregory's younger brother. Records showed he had been troubled, in and out of institutions, estranged from most of his family. He had a history of violence, but nothing that suggested he would be part of the Ledger's legacy. Maybe he tried to stop it, Aaron suggested. Maybe he turned against the family, and they silenced him. Or maybe he was supposed to inherit the Ledger, Marcus countered. But he refused. And that was his punishment. They sat in silence, the weight of the possibilities pressing down. Finally, Marcus said what they were both thinking. Whoever has the Ledger now, they're still out there. And they believe they're the heir. That means the killing isn't over. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep again. He sat at his desk, staring at the photographs from the wooden box. Each face stared back at him like a ghost, their lives reduced to ink and ritual. He thought of the letter, "Do not falter. Do not forget. The Ledger is your duty, your inheritance, your proof of belonging." The Ashfords hadn't just killed. They had built a religion of blood. And someone had inherited the faith. Marcus knew, with a cold certainty, that finding the current heir wasn't just about solving murders from the past. It was about stopping the continuation of something that should have died centuries ago. Because if the Ledger truly was scripture, then somewhere out there, another name was waiting to be written. And if they didn't stop it, the next name could be his. The Devil's Choir. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It lashed against the windows of the precinct like the endless fingers of ghosts demanding to be let in. Detective Marcus Hale sat at his desk with the Ledger open before him, the faint lamplight casting long shadows across the brittle pages. The silence of the office at this late hour was deceptive. Inside his mind, there was only noise. The words from the heir's letter echoed endlessly, "Our blood is not like others. We are chosen to witness, to record, to preserve the order of names." The Ledger was no longer just evidence to him. It was alive. A breathing thing, its inscriptions like whispers urging him deeper into its truth. Every night since discovering the Ashfords' family ritual, Marcus had been plagued with the same dream. He would stand in a darkened church, the pews filled with faceless figures humming in low tones. Their voices built into a dissonant hymn, one that vibrated in his bones rather than his ears. And at the altar stood a man with no face, holding the Ledger, his hand moving furiously across its pages. Each time Marcus tried to approach, the faceless figure would raise his head, and Marcus would wake, heart pounding, sweat chilling his skin. Tonight, the dream lingered even while awake. He rubbed his temples, staring at the open book. Somewhere in its ink was the key to everything, and the voices from his dream seemed to demand he find it. The next morning, Erin Cole arrived at the station with a file tucked under her arm. She looked pale, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "Rough night?" Marcus asked. "I had a dream," she admitted, setting the file down. "Same one I've had twice this week. A choir. Voices singing in Latin. Except it wasn't singing, it was more like screaming all at once." Marcus froze. "I've had dreams too. A church, voices." They stared at each other, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The Ledger was seeping into their lives, their minds. Erin broke the silence by opening the file. "I looked deeper into the Ashfords. Turns out they had ties to a small chapel outside Hollow's End. Abandoned now, but in the early 1900s, it was privately funded by the family. No congregation, no priest on record. Just theirs." Marcus leaned forward. "You're thinking what I'm thinking. That's where they did it. Whatever this ritual was." The chapel stood at the edge of the woods, miles outside town. Reaching it required driving a narrow, winding road swallowed by towering pines. The deeper they went, the less light seemed to penetrate, as if the sun itself refused to touch the Ashfords' sanctuary. When they finally pulled up, the sight chilled them. The building was a Gothic husk, its spire cracked, its stained glass windows shattered. Vines crawled up its stone walls, clawing like skeletal fingers. They stepped inside cautiously, flashlights sweeping the darkness. The air was heavy, the kind of stale dampness that clung to forgotten places. Wooden pews lined the nave, rotting and splintered. At the far end, the altar loomed beneath a stained glass window depicting not Christ or saints but abstract red and black swirls, like fire frozen in glass. Aaron whispered, "This place is wrong." Marcus's beam landed on something behind the altar. He approached and found a carved wooden panel depicting 12 figures in robes, their mouths open in song. But their faces were grotesque, exaggerated, twisted, monstrous. At the center stood a 13th figure, larger than the rest, faceless, holding what was unmistakably the ledger. Aaron's voice trembled. "The Devil's Choir." Marcus nodded grimly. This was their church. They searched further. In a side chamber, they found pews arranged in a circle rather than rows. In the center was a stone basin, stained dark. Marcus crouched and ran his gloved finger across it. The residue was old but unmistakable. "Blood," he said. Aaron recoiled. "They used this place for sacrifices." Marcus looked around at the walls, where faint carvings marred the stone. Hundreds of them, scratched in crude letters, overlapping one another. He shone his light higher, realizing the names climbed all the way up to the ceiling, layer upon layer of generations. "The ledger wasn't the only record," he muttered. "They put the names here too, like scripture on a cathedral wall." Aaron's flashlight flickered. For a moment, she swore she saw movement, shadows that didn't belong. She steadied her hand, forcing herself to breathe. "This place feels alive," she whispered. Back at the precinct, Aaron pulled every record she could on the chapel. Officially, it had never been consecrated. It had no paper trail except for a single land deed belonging to the Ashford family. No priest had ever been assigned, no congregation listed. But there were local rumors. Old newspaper clippings from the 1920s spoke of strange sounds in the woods, singing that echoed at night. Hunters who avoided the area. Farmers who claimed their livestock vanished whenever the Ashfords held gatherings at the estate. One article from 1926 caught Marcus's eye. The headline read, "The Choir of Hollow's End." The piece described a traveling salesman who had gone missing after being seen heading toward the chapel. Locals reported hearing a great swell of voices that night. The police searched, but the salesman was never found. Aaron tapped the article. "It's them. The Devil's Choir." Marcus sat back, staring at the ledger again. They didn't just kill. They performed. The killings were orchestrated. That night, Marcus and Aaron returned to the chapel. This time, they brought a forensic team, though the others were reluctant to enter. Something about the place pressed on everyone's nerves, like walking into a mausoleum where the dead were restless. Inside the circle chamber, one of the technicians uncovered something beneath the floorboards. A hidden compartment. They pried it open, revealing stacks of old hymnals. But when Marcus flipped one open, his blood ran cold. The pages weren't hymns. They were written in the same hand as the ledger. Verses of death, instructions for ritual, names woven into stanzas like lyrics. "This isn't music," Marcus whispered. "It's scripture. A manual for killing." Aaron turned to the team. "Bag everything. Every page." But Marcus kept one book in his hand, unable to look away. The words seemed to crawl across the page, burrowing into his mind. The verses described 12 voices singing together, each representing a name, until a 13th voice joined to complete the hymn. The faceless figure from his dreams. The 13th singer. That night, Marcus dreamed again. The choir stood in their circle, their mouths open, voices shaking the ground. In his dream, he saw their faces. Some were the very people from the photographs in the wooden box. Victims turned into singers, their deaths a verse. And again, at the altar, stood the faceless figure. This time, Marcus drew closer. The figure turned the ledger toward him. The page was blank, except for one line slowly forming in black ink. "Marcus Hale." He woke with a strangled gasp, the sound of the choir still ringing in his ears. The next day, Aaron found him pale and shaken. He told her about the dream. She didn't laugh, didn't brush it off. Instead, she said, "They're pulling you in. Just like they pulled me in with the screaming hymn." Marcus, whoever the heir is, they're still writing. And they've chosen you as the next verse. Marcus stared at the ledger. Its pages seemed heavier than ever, its burden more real. He closed it carefully, almost reverently, though his hands shook. The Devil's Choir isn't finished, he said. And neither are we. The choir boy. The rain eased into a thin mist as Marcus Hale sat in his car outside St. Brigid's orphanage, the building looming like a relic from another time. Its red brick was streaked with mildew, the windows narrow, barred in some places. A wrought iron gate kept the world out, though from the inside, it looked more like it was meant to keep something in. Erin Cole leaned against the hood of her car, arms folded, her trench coat pulled tightly against the damp. She gave Marcus a long look. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. He nodded, though his face said otherwise. The dreams had grown worse since they uncovered the hymnals from the chapel. Every night, the choir grew louder, closer. Every night, his own name on that cursed page darkened like fresh ink. "This is where it leads," he said firmly. "Every trail points back here. The Ashfords funneled children through this place. Choir boys, choir girls, their voices were part of the ritual. Whoever survived carried the mark." Erin frowned. "And you think one of them might still be alive?" Marcus adjusted his tie, his hand trembling for a moment. "I don't just think. I know." Inside, the orphanage smelled of bleach and old paper, with a faint metallic tang that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of blood. Sister Agnes, the head of the orphanage, greeted them in the lobby. She was in her 70s, hunched slightly but sharp-eyed. "Detective Hale, Agent Cole," she said with a polite but guarded smile. "You wanted to ask about the choir?" Her voice cracked on the word, as though it had been locked in her throat for decades. Marcus and Erin exchanged a glance. "Yes," Marcus said carefully. "The children's choir you kept here in the 1980s. We found records of several children who disappeared around that time. No adoptions, no transfers. Just gone." Sister Agnes stiffened. Her hands folded tightly in front of her. "Those children, they were special. Gifted." "Gifted how?" Erin asked. Her eyes darted away, toward a crucifix on the wall. "They had voices like angels. The Ashfords sponsored them. Paid for lessons, new robes, instruments. We thought it was charity. I didn't know. I didn't know what it was really for." Marcus stepped closer. "And one boy survived." The nun's lips trembled. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Just Samuel." They found Samuel in the orphanage's infirmary, though he wasn't a child anymore. He was nearly 40 now, gaunt and pale, with hollow eyes that seemed fixed on something far away. His hair was graying prematurely, his hands twitching as if to music only he could hear. He sat in a chair by the window, staring through the glass at the courtyard where rain pooled in cracks of broken stone. When Marcus and Erin entered, he didn't move. "Samuel?" Erin asked softly. His head turned slowly, his gaze landing on Marcus. His lips parted and he whispered, "You've seen them." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "The choir." Samuel nodded once. His voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken much in years. "They never stopped singing. Not for me. Not for anyone chosen. At night, their voices, they come through the walls." Marcus crouched down in front of him. "Samuel, I need you to tell me what happened. The Ashfords brought you to the chapel, didn't they?" Samuel's hands twitched violently, his fingers curling into claws. For a moment, Marcus thought he might scream, but instead Samuel began humming. Low, shaky at first, then steady. The melody was haunting, the same dissonant notes Marcus had heard in his dreams. Erin's face went pale. "That's it. That's the hymn." Samuel's eyes filled with tears as he stopped humming. His voice cracked as he whispered, "We sang for them. 12 of us. They told us our voices would open the door. That we would be closer to God. But it wasn't God we were singing to." Marcus swallowed hard. "What happened to the others?" "They were taken. One by one, after each hymn. Their names were written in the book, and then silence. Only silence. And you." Marcus pressed. Samuel's eyes shifted toward the ceiling. "I wasn't chosen. My voice cracked. They said I was imperfect. So they left me. But the song never left. It never left. Later, outside in the misty courtyard, Erin paced while Marcus leaned against the orphanage wall. He's broken, she muttered. Whatever they did to him, it hollowed him out. Marcus rubbed his forehead. But he gave us confirmation. The choir wasn't metaphorical. They used children as instruments. Samuel survived, but the others, he trailed off, glancing at the chapel hymnals still bagged as evidence. They were the devil's choir. Erin shuddered. And if Samuel's right, then someone is still writing verses. Still building that choir. That night, Marcus returned to his apartment, but sleep refused him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat at his desk, the ledger locked away in the evidence box across town but still somehow present in his room. He heard humming. At first, he thought it was the pipes. Then, as he strained his ears, the melody sharpened. The hymn. Samuel's broken hum echoing in his mind. Marcus grabbed his coat and gun, leaving the apartment in a rush. The streets were damp, slick with rain. He found himself driving without knowing why, his hands gripping the wheel too tightly. When he stopped, he was in front of the chapel again. The doors were open. Marcus stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting across the ruined pews. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew and ash. At the altar, he froze. Samuel stood there. His thin frame swayed, his arms lifted like a conductor. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "You followed the song," Samuel whispered. His voice was different now, stronger, steadier. "You hear it, don't you?" Marcus's hand hovered over his holster. "Samuel, what are you doing here?" Samuel smiled faintly, though his lips quivered. "They never stopped singing for me. I was left behind, but I was never freed. I am the 13th voice. The one who hears. The one who leads." The sound began again, low and thunderous, though no mouths moved. The walls themselves seemed to hum. Marcus's flashlight flickered, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. Samuel's gaze burned into him. "You've been chosen, Marcus. You are the next verse. And when the song is complete, the door will open again." Marcus's heart pounded. "What door?" Samuel's smile widened, his voice breaking into song, the same hymn Marcus had heard in dreams. This time, the sound wasn't only in his head. It filled the chapel, vibrating the walls, rattling the broken glass. And then Marcus heard it, other voices, joining in from the shadows. 12 of them, faint but unmistakable. The devil's choir was not gone. It was still singing. Marcus staggered back, his breath ragged, his mind reeling. He reached for his gun, but Samuel's song grew louder, stronger. The air itself pressed against Marcus's chest like a weight. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Samuel collapsed to his knees, coughing blood. His hands trembled as he wiped his mouth, looking up at Marcus with hollow eyes. "They won't stop," he whispered hoarsely, "until the last name is written." Marcus stared at him, horrified. "Whose name?" Samuel smiled faintly, almost tenderly. "Yours." The silence that followed was unbearable. Marcus dragged Samuel outside, calling Erin with shaking hands. By the time she arrived with backup, Samuel had gone catatonic again, humming softly to himself, his body curled like a child's. Erin knelt beside him, her expression grim. "He's the choir boy. The last of them. But Marcus, what if he's not just a survivor? What if he's their vessel?" Marcus stared back at the dark chapel, his heart still pounding with the echo of the hymn. He thought of the dream, the faceless conductor holding the ledger, the blank line forming his name. He knew now that it wasn't just a dream. The choir wasn't finished. And Samuel was proof it was still waiting for its final verse. The House of Echoes. The road to the Blackburn estate twisted like a serpent through the hills, shadowed by gnarled oaks whose branches clawed at the roof of Detective Marlowe's car. It was nearly midnight, the hour when silence thickens and the world feels caught between one breath and the next. He had driven out here on instinct more than evidence, following the breadcrumb trail of the ledger's names, and every part of him felt the weight of the destination, the house where generations of secrets had curdled into legend. The Blackburn mansion had been abandoned for decades. At least, that was the story whispered by townsfolk who dared not drive this road after dark. But as Marlowe pulled into the overgrown courtyard, the truth immediately unraveled that myth. A faint orange glow pulsed through the cracked shutters. Someone, or something, was home. He stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on gravel wet with dew, and the air hit him like a wall, damp, metallic, thick with the scent of mold and rust. The house loomed ahead, its facade a patchwork of rotting wood and peeling paint. Yet, for all its decay, the building still carried a kind of grandeur, like a corpse refusing to surrender to rot. Marlowe adjusted the revolver holstered at his side and gripped the ledger tighter under his arm. Its weight had become unbearable since he discovered the unwritten name scrawled faintly at the end. He didn't need to admit it out loud to know whose name was supposed to appear next. The front door groaned open with the faintest push, hinges whining as though awakened from a nightmare. Inside, the house breathed around him. Floorboards sighed, walls whispered with drafts, and somewhere deep within, a faint sound echoed, a child's voice, humming the same hymn that had haunted every turn of this investigation. "The Devil's Choir," he muttered, still singing. The foyer was a cavern of dust. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals darkened with grime, swaying slightly as though stirred by invisible hands. Family portraits lined the walls, their eyes painted with unnatural sharpness, staring down at him. He glanced at the brass plate beneath one of the frames. Gideon Blackburn, 1893. The face was gaunt, sharp, and eerily familiar. He had seen echoes of that face in old police sketches, in the features of townspeople long dead, and, uncomfortably, in the reflection of his own cheekbones. Marlowe pushed deeper into the house. Every room echoed back his movements, a delayed repetition like footsteps chasing him. He passed the parlor, where furniture lay under white sheets, resembling corpses lined for burial. He passed the library, where books had spilled across the floor in chaotic heaps. The humming grew louder, luring him upward. The staircase groaned with each step. His lantern light cast wild shadows that crawled up the walls, merging with the peeling wallpaper like living things. By the time he reached the second floor, the humming had sharpened into a melody. It wasn't random. It was a hymn, the same one sung by the choir boy before his death. He followed the sound down the hallway. Doors lined both sides, some hanging crooked on their hinges, others shut tight. From behind one, he heard a soft scratching, as though nails scraped wood from the inside. He tightened his grip on the revolver but didn't dare open it. The sound drew him to the farthest door, the master bedroom. The knob was cold as ice under his palm, and when he turned it, the hinges wailed. Inside, the air felt different. Heavy. The room had been preserved, unlike the rest of the house. A four-poster bed stood in the center, its sheets pristine, as if waiting for someone. The wallpaper was intact, the curtains freshly drawn. A mirror hung opposite the bed, tall and flawless. And in the center of the floor, illuminated by the flicker of candles, sat a small wooden chair. On the chair lay a child's doll, its porcelain face cracked, its dress stitched with red thread. The doll's glass eyes gleamed in the candlelight. The humming stopped. Marlowe froze, listening. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Then, behind him, the door shut with a slam. He spun, revolver raised, but the room was empty. Only the doll sat in its chair, watching him. And then it spoke. Not with lips, but with a voice that filled the room, bouncing from the walls, echoing like dozens of children chanting in unison. "You've brought the ledger home." Marlowe's stomach dropped. "Who's there?" The doll's head turned slowly, impossibly, to face the mirror. Marlowe followed its gaze. His reflection stared back at him, but not as he was. This version of himself wore an expression twisted with cruelty. Blood darkened his collar. And in his reflection's hand was not a revolver, but the ledger, opened to the final page. The unwritten name was no longer blank. It was his. Detective Alan Marlowe. He staggered back, heart pounding. "No, that's not." "You are the heir," the voices chorused. "The bloodline binds you. The ledger claims its keeper." Images slammed into his mind. Generations of Blackburn men, each one bound to the ledger, each one feeding names into its cursed pages. Those who resisted were consumed. Those who obeyed lived as its servants. He saw himself joining their ranks, his face appearing alongside Gideon Blackburn's, his name etched forever in the cursed book. "No," he whispered. "I won't." The doll laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You have no choice." The mirror's surface rippled like water, and his reflection stepped forward, separating from the glass. It was him, yet not him, eyes burning with malice, a smile carved into its face. The doppelganger raised the ledger, its pages fluttering like wings. Marlowe fired. The gunshot shattered the mirror into 1,000 shards, spraying the room with glittering fragments. The reflection collapsed into dust. But the ledger remained, lying open on the floor. And the name, his name, was still written inside. He stared down at it, chest heaving. The doll's voice whispered softly now, almost tender. Once written, never erased. The candles blew out. The room plunged into darkness. Marlowe stumbled toward the door, but when he reached for it, his hand met solid wall. The door was gone. In its place stretched more wallpaper, seamless, trapping him. He turned in circles. Every side of the room was closed now, as if the house itself had swallowed him. The whispers began again, louder this time, dozens of voices overlapping. They spoke in fragments, in prayers, in hymns. The choir sings, the blood remembers, the air returns. Marlowe gritted his teeth, clutching the revolver in one hand and the ledger in the other. If this house thinks it can keep me, it doesn't know who it's dealing with. And then, as if in answer, a hidden door creaked open behind the bed. A narrow passage yawned into darkness, lined with stone and smelling of damp earth. The whispers urged him forward. With no other choice, Marlowe stepped inside. The passage twisted downward, deeper into the belly of the house. His lantern barely pierced the shadows, but he pressed on, the whispers guiding him. At last, the tunnel opened into a subterranean chamber. It was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness. Along the walls hung rows of ledgers, hundreds of them, stacked like holy relics. And in the center of the room, seated at a massive stone table, was a figure in black robes. The figure raised its head. The hood fell back. It was Gideon Blackburn, or what remained of him. His face was parchment thin, stretched over bone, his eyes glowing faintly. He spoke, his voice echoing through the cavern like a church bell. "You've come here. The choir waits. The ledger is yours now." Marlowe lifted his revolver, though his hand shook. "I'm not your heir. I'm ending this tonight." Blackburn smiled, a terrible, skeletal grin. "Then you are already lost." The chamber erupted with voices, deafening, a choir of the damned. The ledgers flew open, their pages flapping like wings, and the names written within screamed aloud in agony. Marlowe staggered, covering his ears. The ledger in his hand burned hot, its pages glowing. His name pulsed on the paper like a heartbeat. And in that instant he knew the truth. The only way to end the cycle was not to escape, but to destroy the ledger itself. He raised it high, above the stone table. The voices screamed louder. Blackburn rose to his feet, fury distorting his skeletal face. "No, the ledger is forever." Marlowe slammed the book down onto the stone with every ounce of strength he had. The impact cracked the table in half. The ledger burst into flame, fire leaping hungrily across its pages. The voices shrieked, the chamber shook, the ledgers on the walls igniting one by one in a chain reaction. Blackburn howled, his body unraveling into ash. The choir's song collapsed into silence. And then, darkness. When Marlowe woke, he was lying outside, in the courtyard of the Blackburn estate. The house was gone, reduced to a smoldering crater in the earth. The ledger was nothing but ash in his hands. The whispers were gone. The hymns were gone. But as he stood there in the early dawn, one thought chilled him. Was his name truly erased, or had the book only been waiting for another keeper to write it again? The keeper of secrets. Detective Alan Marlowe had always been a man who believed in truth. In 20 years of law enforcement, he'd built his reputation on dragging hidden things into the light. Lies, crimes, betrayals. But in the weeks since burning the Blackburn ledger, he'd begun to understand that truth could sometimes be worse than the lie. He hadn't slept properly since that night. Every time his eyes closed, the faces of the names screamed back at him. He heard the choir still, faint, distant, like an echo trapped in his skull. The house was gone, reduced to charred earth, but the destruction had not freed him. It had only changed the shape of the curse. And then came the letter. It arrived without a stamp, slipped under the door of his apartment sometime before dawn. The envelope was plain, the handwriting neat and deliberate. His name, written in black ink, Detective Marlowe. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature. Only 4 words, scrawled in red. The keeper still lives. He sat at his kitchen table for hours, staring at those words while the sun rose behind the blinds. By afternoon, he had convinced himself of 2 things. First, burning the ledger had not ended the cycle. And second, someone was watching him. By the next night, he was back in the archives of the county records office. The clerks had long since gone home, and Marlowe had slipped in through the side door with his old badge. The room smelled of dust and mildew, rows of filing cabinets stretching into shadows. He dug into the Blackburn genealogy again, piecing together the family line like stitching torn fabric. Gideon Blackburn had founded the House of Horrors, but the bloodline had not ended with him. Children had scattered, changed names, fled across states. Some had lived ordinary lives. Others, the trail led to one name that made Marlowe's blood run cold: Elias Crane. A respected historian in town, a man Marlowe had even spoken with when he first started digging into the choir's legend. Crane had seemed helpful, even fatherly, pointing him to old records, photographs, church documents. But looking again with fresh eyes, Marlowe saw the deception. Crane wasn't just an interested scholar. He was a direct descendant of the Blackburn line. And maybe, just maybe, the true keeper of secrets. Crane lived in a restored farmhouse on the edge of the county. At night, it looked like something from another century, its windows lit softly, a lantern swinging from the porch. Marlowe parked his car a half-mile down the road and approached on foot, revolver under his coat. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. Crickets chirped in the fields. It could have been peaceful, except for the weight in Marlowe's chest, the instinct that he was stepping into a trap. Through the window, he saw Crane seated at a massive oak desk. The man's hair was white, his posture stooped, but there was nothing frail about him. He was writing in a leather-bound book, his pen scratching steadily across the page. Marlowe's pulse quickened. He knew that posture, that devotion. He had seen it in Blackburn's skeletal form beneath the house. He had seen it in himself, staring at the cursed ledger. Crane wasn't just a descendant. He was the successor. Marlowe knocked once, sharp on the door. Silence. Then slow footsteps crossed the wooden floor, and the door creaked open. Crane stood in the threshold, his eyes catching the light like shards of glass. "Detective," he said warmly, as if greeting an old friend. "I wondered how long it would take." "Step aside, Crane." Marlowe's voice was hard. "I know what you are." Crane smiled thinly, not moving. "And what am I, exactly?" "You're the keeper now. The one carrying on Blackburn's work. The ledger may be gone, but you're still writing, aren't you?" Crane tilted his head. "Come in, Alan. We shouldn't speak of such things on the porch." Against his better judgment, Marlowe stepped inside. The farmhouse was immaculate. Bookshelves lined every wall, each crammed with volumes, journals, scraps of history. But unlike the chaotic archives, Crane's collection was ordered, meticulous. Every spine labeled, every shelf dusted. It was the home of a man who lived for memory. On the desk lay the leather-bound book. It wasn't the same ledger, but Marlowe knew it without touching it. The curse had simply taken a new vessel. "You think you destroyed it," Crane said softly, closing the book with deliberate care. "But the ledger was never meant to be burned. It doesn't end with fire. It endures through blood, through hands, through memory. Destroy one, and another appears." Marlowe's hand twitched toward his revolver. "Not if I end it with you." Crane's laugh was low, almost pitying. "Do you really think killing me will stop it? I'm just a keeper, Alan. A custodian. The true power isn't in me, it's in you. Marlowe froze. What are you talking about? Crane stepped closer, his pale eyes fixed on him. You've heard the voices. You've felt the weight of the unwritten name. You are part of the line now. The ledger didn't write your name as a mistake. It wrote it because you are the heir. You destroyed one book, yes, but you carry the pages now inside you. Marlowe's throat tightened. His mind reeled back to the moment in the house when the mirror showed his reflection, smiling with the ledger in its hands. The name written in ink that pulsed like a heartbeat. No, he whispered. I'm not like you. You are exactly like me, Crane said. The only question is whether you'll resist and go mad, or accept your role and live. The room seemed to close in, the books pressing down from all sides. Marlowe's revolver felt like dead weight in his hand. He wanted to shoot Crane, to end it here and now, but what if the old man was right? What if killing him only passed the burden fully onto himself? Crane returned to his desk, running a hand fondly over the leather-bound book. The choir never dies, detective. It waits. It sings through us. There will always be a keeper. If you kill me, the ledger will find you. If you burn this book, another will appear. That is the way of things. Then what do you want from me? Marlowe asked, voice low. Crane's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. I want you to stop pretending. Accept who you are. Take your place as keeper, and you'll never fear the dark again. You'll understand the order in chaos. The power in names. Marlowe stared at him, chest heaving. For a moment he felt the pull, a strange, intoxicating allure to simply surrender, to let the burden become purpose. But then he saw again the faces of the victims, their names screaming from the burning pages. He remembered the choir boy's eyes before death, wide with terror. No, Marlowe said, steady now. If I am keeper, then I choose what to keep. And I'll keep nothing. Not this book. Not you. Not the Blackburn name. Before Crane could answer, Marlowe snatched the leather-bound book from the desk. Pages fluttered wildly, names written in crimson ink bleeding across them. The voices surged in his head, screaming, pleading, cursing. Crane lunged, but Marlowe was faster. He shoved the book into the fireplace, flames devouring it instantly. The fire roared, consuming pages, ink, and leather alike. Crane screamed, a sound not of pain but of fury, ancient and inhuman. His body shook, his skin cracking like porcelain. You fool, he shrieked. It will only return. The keeper cannot erase the ledger, he can only feed it. Marlowe drew his revolver, aiming square at Crane's chest. Then maybe it's time the keeper breaks the rules. The shot thundered through the farmhouse. Crane staggered, clutched his chest, and collapsed onto the rug. His final breath rattled through his teeth, and then his body stilled. For a moment, silence. Only the crackle of the fire. Marlowe stood over him, revolver trembling in his hand. His chest ached, not from the confrontation, but from the weight of Crane's words. He could still hear the choir faintly, as if it had slipped from the burning book into his veins. He had killed the man. He had burned the book. But deep down he knew the keeper's role had not ended. It had only shifted. And now, whether he liked it or not, the secrets were his to carry. Marlowe left the farmhouse before dawn. The body would be found eventually, the house catalogued, the fire chalked up to accident. He drove the empty road back toward town, the horizon pale with morning. As he drove, he felt the weight in his pocket. Reaching inside, he pulled out a scrap of paper, singed around the edges. A page from the ledger. The fire hadn't consumed it all. And written on the page, in fresh, wet ink, was a new name. Alan Marlowe. The ink pulsed, alive, like a vein cut open. Marlowe's grip tightened, the paper burning cold in his hand. The keeper's secrets were his now. And he feared they always would be. The trial of voices. The trial was never meant to happen inside a courtroom. Merrick Hollow had long since stopped trusting the polished rituals of law. No attorney, no rogue judge, no jury of strangers could pierce the tangled roots of the town's secrets. Instead, the townspeople gathered in the old town hall, A creaking wooden building that had once been used for revivals and town councils but now served as the stage for something far older, something that resembled justice only in shape. It was a trial of voices. The benches overflowed with people who had lived their entire lives in silence, afraid to challenge the shadow that stretched over Merrick Hollow. Tonight, silence was forbidden. Tonight, every voice mattered. Sheriff Holt stood at the front, his hands gripping the edges of the oak table as though bracing himself against the weight of the storm he had unleashed. Behind him sat Eleanor Vale, her pale hands folded in her lap, her eyes trained on the cracks in the floorboards. She had become the reluctant centerpiece of this reckoning, the heir to her father's ledger, the keeper of secrets no one wanted spoken aloud. The ledger itself lay in the center of the table, bound in brittle leather, its spine cracked from years of handling. Every page was an accusation, every entry a knife. "Before we begin," Sheriff Holt said, his voice gravelly but steady, "you all should know this isn't law as the outside world knows it. We can't depend on lawyers to untangle what's been woven here. This is Merrick Hollow's business, and it'll be decided in Merrick Hollow's way. By us. By our voices." A murmur rippled through the hall, some uneasy, some defiant. He lifted the ledger and set it down with a heavy thud. "This book contains every name tied to the Devil's Choir. Some of those names belong to your fathers, your mothers. Some belong to your children, and some belong to the dead." Gasps darted through the crowd like sparks leaping from a fire. People shifted in their seats, pressing closer together as if afraid to be caught alone. Eleanor finally raised her eyes. Her voice, quiet but cutting, slipped into the hall. "My father kept records because he believed the voices demanded proof. He thought if he wrote down their bargains, their sins, their confessions, the hollow itself would stay balanced. He was wrong. The ledger didn't keep balance. It kept chains." From the crowd, a woman stood, Margaret Faulkner, her gray hair twisted into a bun, her shoulders trembling. "You say it holds names. Then read them aloud. Let us hear who bound us to this curse." Her demand was met with both agreement and resistance. Some shouted, "Read it," while others hissed back, "No, leave it buried." The clash of voices filled the hall, the sound jagged and frenzied, until Holt slammed his fist onto the table. "Order," he barked. "If you want this trial, then you'll let it be heard in full. No whispering in corners. No hiding in shadows. We'll hear the voices tonight, all of them." He looked to Eleanor, his eyes heavy with the weight of the decision. "You carry this burden. Will you read?" Eleanor's hands hovered over the ledger. She trembled, but her jaw hardened. "I will." She opened the book. The scent of mold and dust rose into the air, earthy and sour. She scanned the page and began to speak. "Caleb Whitmore, 1934, bargain. Livestock spared from the sickness in exchange for a son's voice at the harvest ceremony." A man in the back gasped, clutching his cane. His son had vanished decades ago, swallowed by the hollow. He buried his face in his hands. Eleanor turned another page. "Mary Collins, 1951, bargain. Child saved from drowning in exchange for silence about the choir." An old woman whimpered, whispering, "That was me, oh God, that was me." Page after page, voice after voice. Each entry was a stone cast into the crowd, shattering what they thought they knew about their families. Every name tore another seam in the town's fragile facade. The voices of the living rose against the voices of the dead. Some denied the truth outright. Others screamed in grief or rage. Mothers turned on daughters, husbands on wives. The town hall became a cauldron of memory and madness. Sheriff Holt tried to steady them. "This isn't about punishment, it's about truth. About bringing what's been hidden into the light." But the townspeople didn't want truth. They wanted vengeance. A young man leapt from his bench, his eyes blazing. "My grandfather gave them my uncle. And you expect us to just sit here and listen?" He lunged toward the table, but others pulled him back, voices shouting over one another until the sound was deafening. Through the chaos, Eleanor kept reading, her voice unwavering though her body shook. "Henry Vale, 1978, bargain. Protection from ruin in exchange for one heir chosen by the choir." The hall fell into stunned silence. All eyes turned toward her. "My father," she said, her throat tight. "He promised one of us. Either me or Samuel." A sob escaped her before she could contain it. Her brother had been the one taken, his name consumed by the hollow, his body never found. And now the truth was plain. Samuel had not been stolen by fate. He had been offered. A howl erupted from the benches, rage, grief, disbelief. People began to pound their fists against the wood, the noise rising like a storm. Holt slammed his palm against the ledger. "Enough!" His voice cracked through the clamor. "This is the trial. Not of Eleanor. Not of Henry Vale. Of all of us. Every one of us has lived in this town, hearing the whispers, feeling the cost. The question is, what do we do now that the truth is laid bare?" The crowd seethed. For every call of "burn the ledger," there was another for "keep it, protect it." Eleanor clutched the book to her chest, her voice breaking. "Don't you see? It doesn't matter if we burn it or keep it. The hollow already knows. The voices will always know." Her words struck something deeper than anger. It struck fear. That was when the voices began. Soft at first, threading through the rafters, barely audible beneath the din. A murmur, a sigh, a chorus not born from human throats. The townspeople froze, their anger swallowed by dread. The voices grew louder, rising like wind through broken reeds. They spoke no language anyone could name, yet every person understood them in the marrow of their bones. It was accusation. It was demand. The hall shook as if the hollow itself leaned against its walls. Margaret Faulkner screamed, "They're here! They're listening!" Panic exploded. Some fled the hall, tripping over benches in their haste. Others dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as though trying to shut out the sound. Children wailed. Grown men sobbed. Sheriff Holt stood firm, though sweat streamed down his temples. He shouted above the cacophony, "This is the trial of voices. You wanted their judgment. Here it is. Stand and face it." But no one wanted to face it. The ledger in Eleanor's arms vibrated violently, its pages fluttering though no wind touched them. Words bled through the paper, letters rearranging into shapes that writhed like living things. "They're rewriting it," Eleanor whispered in horror. "They're writing new bargains." The voices swelled into a deafening chorus. Some swore they heard their own names shouted from the rafters, others the cries of long-dead loved ones. The hall became a vortex of past and present, guilt and grief collapsing together. Then, as suddenly as it had risen, the noise ceased. The hall fell silent, save for the ragged breathing of those who remained. The ledger lay open on the table once more, still and calm as though nothing had happened. Sheriff Holt lifted it cautiously. His hands shook as he read aloud what had appeared on the last page. "The debt of Merrick Hollow shall be decided by those who carry the truth. One shall keep the voices. One shall silence them. Choose." The words struck like a hammer. Two fates. Two choices. All eyes turned to Eleanor, the natural heir of the ledger, the unwilling keeper of secrets. And then, slowly, the crowd turned to Sheriff Holt, the man who had dragged the truth into the open. The trial of voices had not named the guilty. It had not delivered punishment. It had demanded a choice. Eleanor's hands trembled over the book. If I keep them, the ledger lives. The cycle continues. If I silence them, I burn it, and we risk unleashing whatever they've held back. The townspeople stared, their faces carved with desperation. The hollow had shifted the trial back to them, leaving the burden where it had always belonged, in their hands. Sheriff Holt's voice cracked as he said, "Then we vote. With our voices. For the first time in this town's history, we'll decide our own fate." And so the trial ended not with a verdict, but with a question that would echo far beyond the town hall walls. The people of Merrick Hollow prepared to cast their voices, not for guilt or innocence, but for survival. The trial of voices was only the beginning. The Hollow's verdict. The old town hall had never felt so heavy, as if the beams and rafters strained against a burden far greater than timber could bear. Every lantern flickered as though the air itself grew nervous, every flame swaying in anticipation of the choice that now hung over Merrick Hollow. Sheriff Holt stood at the front, flanked by Eleanor Vale and the ledger that pulsed with unnatural quiet. For hours, voices had screamed, pleaded, and condemned. Now, silence cloaked the room like a shroud. No one dared break it, not even the children who had cried themselves into exhausted stillness. "The Hollow has demanded a choice," Holt said, his voice gravelly but resolute. "One to keep the voices. One to silence them. No judge, no jury, just us. Our voices will decide." The ledger lay open on the table, its final page glowing faintly in the lamplight. The words, "One shall keep, one shall silence," were written not in ink but in something that seemed to shift with every glance, as if made of shadow and flame. Eleanor's gaze never left it. She had felt the ledger's weight in her arms, the tug of the voices inside. Her father's sins, her family's legacy, every whispered name, all of it pressed on her chest like an iron brand. She whispered to Holt, though the hall could hear, "If I keep it, I bind myself to it. But if I burn it, there's no telling what comes loose. Either way, the Hollow takes its due." Holt placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but kind. "This isn't just yours to bear anymore. Tonight, the town speaks." He turned to the benches, where every face seemed carved from fear and grief. "We vote now. Those who say Eleanor keeps the ledger, stand to the left. Those who say we silence the voices, stand to the right. No one hides. No one abstains." At first, no one moved. The stillness stretched, thick as tar, until Margaret Faulkner, the gray-haired widow who had demanded the reading of names, rose to her feet. Her cane tapped once against the floor, sharp as a gavel. "I say silence," she declared, her eyes hard despite her trembling hands. "Too long have we lived in chains. Let it end." She shuffled to the right side of the hall. A murmur followed her. Then slowly, others stood. A farmer and his wife. A boy no older than 16. They joined Margaret, their footsteps loud in the hush. But soon came another voice. Jonathan Creed, broad-shouldered and wild-eyed, pushed to his feet. "And what if silence doesn't end it? What if it frees the very thing that's been bound? My father made his bargain. It spared our family ruin. You think burning the ledger makes that debt vanish? It'll make us pray." He moved to the left side, his boots echoing. The division had begun. One by one, families split. Husbands dragged wives in one direction while children pulled away toward the other. The hall became a map of fractured loyalties. Each step was a confession, a declaration of what kind of terror they feared most. Through it all, Eleanor sat still, her eyes hollow. This was not freedom. It was division carved into flesh. Yet it was the only way forward. When the last person had chosen, Holt stepped back, counting the bodies with his weary gaze. The room quivered with anticipation. The verdict was razor-thin. 23 for keeping, 25 for silence. The Hollow's fate had been sealed by two voices more than the other side. A ripple of sound moved through the hall, relief, rage, disbelief. Some cheered. Others wept. Some sank to the floor, muttering prayers under their breath. Eleanor rose to her feet, her knees trembling. The ledger pulsed once in response, as though aware of its imminent end. She carried it to the iron brazier set in the center of the hall, its coals glowing faintly from the lantern flames. The crowd leaned forward, eyes locked on her every step. "Are you certain?" Holt whispered. Her voice cracked but held. "If this is the Hollow's verdict, then let it be done." She lifted the book above the brazier. The moment the leather touched flame, the hall erupted. The fire roared unnaturally high, tongues of flame leaping like reaching hands. The ledger's pages curled and blackened, but instead of crumbling to ash, they bled ink that hissed as it dripped onto the coals. The air filled with a chorus of screams, hundreds of voices, each distinct, each agonized. The townspeople clutched their ears, some collapsing, some wailing. But Eleanor did not let go. She forced the book deeper into the fire, her face lit by the glow. "Be silent," she cried, her voice breaking. "Be silent and gone." The flames burst upward, cracking the rafters, shaking the walls. For a moment it seemed the hall itself would collapse. And then, Just as suddenly, it ended. The fire vanished. The brazier was cold. The ledger was gone. The silence that followed was not like the silence of fear. It was vast, profound. For the first time in living memory, there were no whispers in the hollow. No voices scratching at the edge of hearing. The people stared in disbelief. Some sobbed with relief. Others shook, waiting for the punishment that never came. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, her hands burned raw but empty. Holt knelt beside her, his face both fearful and awed. "It's done," she whispered. "The ledger is gone. The voices, they're gone." But were they? Outside, the wind rose through the trees, not in words, not in whispers, just wind. The forest no longer hummed with secrets. For the first time in generations, Merrick Hollow was still. The townspeople left the hall in silence, as though afraid to speak lest the voices return. Families clung together, not in division now, but in fragile unity. They had chosen. The hollow had listened. Only Eleanor lingered, staring at the cold brazier. She felt an absence where once there had been a constant presence. For years, the ledger had bound her life to the voices, a weight she had loathed but understood. Now, there was only emptiness. Holt touched her shoulder. "You freed us." She shook her head. "I don't know if I freed us or abandoned us." He had no answer. Neither did the hollow. Weeks later, life in Merrick Hollow changed in ways subtle and profound. The air felt lighter, as though some unseen fog had lifted. Children laughed without fear of being hushed. The woods, once a place of dread, became merely woods again. But change came with unease. Farmers whispered that their crops wilted faster than before. Hunters swore the forest grew too quiet, as if even the animals sensed the shift. Some townsfolk muttered that without the voices, the hollow was vulnerable, naked before whatever had once been held at bay. And in Eleanor's dreams, silence was never empty. In her sleep, she still felt the pull of voices, not whispering, not demanding, but waiting. The final gathering. On the first anniversary of the trial of voices, the town gathered again at the hall. Lanterns lit the room, but the space felt changed. No heaviness pressed on their shoulders. No unseen eyes lingered in the rafters. Sheriff Holt stood before them, his hair grayer, his posture more bent, but his voice steady. "We live without bargains now," he said. "We live without the ledger. That was your choice. And it is held, for now. But remember this, the hollow is old. Older than all of us. We do not know if its hunger has truly died, or if it merely waits. What we do know is this: we will never again give it our children, our families, our voices. If the hollow comes calling, it will find us standing together, not bound by a book, not bound by fear." The people murmured agreement. For the first time, it felt like resolve rather than desperation. Eleanor stepped forward. Her hair was streaked with silver now, though she was still young. The trial had aged her in ways time could not measure. "I carried the ledger," she said, her voice carrying across the hall. "I burned it. And yet I know this: the hollow remembers. It always will. What matters is that we remember too. Not the bargains. Not the voices. But the choice we made when the hollow asked. That is the legacy we leave behind." The crowd was silent, listening. And in that silence, no one heard whispers. No one felt unseen eyes. There was only the creak of the rafters, the flicker of the lanterns, and the sound of people breathing together. For Merrick Hollow, that was enough. Years later, when Eleanor Vale passed away, the townsfolk buried her at the edge of the forest. They carved no elaborate epitaph, only words chiseled into stone. She kept the voices. She silenced them. She chose. And though children of later generations would sometimes claim to hear faint songs when the wind rustled through the trees at night, the townsfolk would smile and shake their heads. "There are no voices here," they would say, "only echoes of what we left behind." And the hollow, for once, remained quiet.